I'm back to talk about Sword of Destiny, which is the second in the Witcher books. This is the second review that I'm doing as part of a larger series that is about whether or not it's worth reading the Witcher books. So you can find at one of these sides the Witcher, the Witcher: The Last Wish review, and I recommend that you watch that before you watch this one. So, The Witcher Sword of Destiny is very different than The Last Wish. I love The Last Wish, and I loved Sword of Destiny just as much, but it's a very different thing. Now, I think that the most important thing that you have to understand about this whole thing is that some of these short stories in The Last Wish came out before this publication did. And that a lot of what we have in the way of canon is artificially produced by an editorial staff. I don't know to what extent Mr. Sapkowski, the author, was involved in these editorial decisions, but you have to keep that in mind. And I'll explain why in greater detail later in the video. So it's very important to remember that Sword of Destiny was technically published before The Last Wish, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean anything because The Last Wish is a collection of short stories, and I think that they inserted some things to give it a greater continuity and to give it something that could connect with books down the road. There's this effect that was created in The Last Wish where they took short stories that had been published earlier. Whether or not Mr. Sapkowski had any idea how they would fit in, I don't know, and I don't think we should presume to know, which is, I think, the danger of rushing and referring to canon when we're talking about these books. But each of these short stories is juxtaposed against a kind of reflective narrative where we have Geralt and he's kind of just sitting and he's recuperating, and this creates this effect where we have Geralt reflecting on the past rather than just a book of short stories, and this creates a narrative. So if I can borrow an example from Julio Cortázar, The Last Wish is an equidistant sphere. Okay, so you have the center point of the sphere, which is Geralt sitting and reflecting, and then you have all these short stories that go out to the end of the sphere. And that's how the book works. Everything is as far away from that centerpiece as possible, and it gives you this spherical feel. Sword of Destiny is very different. Sword of Destiny is a polyhedron. Okay, there are many large successive story arcs that you might even consider to be novellas, or honestly, you could, if nobody called this a book of short stories, you would probably think that this is a novel. So The Last Wish was really about Geralt coming to terms politically with his identity and the world that he was a part of, and the role that he played within that. Sword of Destiny is much more psychological, which I think will surprise some people because The Last Wish did have this reflective therapeutic component to it, but Sword of Destiny is all about Geralt's relationship to humans. And this gets summarized very neatly by his friend Dandelion later in the book, where he says, Geralt, your problem is that you think that you are different from everybody, and yet you're this weird salamander that's crawling around, and you think that everybody thinks that you're some freakazoid, and the truth is that you are more normal than anybody in the world. And this is a very apt criticism of Geralt's character, because Geralt has this whole Holden Caulfield thing going on in his mind. But the truth is that Geralt is the hero of our books. He's the hero of our books, and while he is different and he has all these powers, he is totally relatable, which is kind of the basic formula of fantasy, is that we can really connect to Geralt in the same way that we could connect with Holden Caulfield. Okay, but they also have the same insecurities. So Geralt is totally human. And it's unfortunate that he's in denial of this. And unfortunately, there are people out there who are not great people who also deny this. But everybody who loves Geralt is totally capable of seeing how human he really is. And this is the point of Sword of Destiny. As another principal theme, and probably what is the most important theme as far as what they want, as what the writer and the editorial staff want you to think, is the theme of destiny. And I personally felt that this was the most superficial aspect of the book, and it wasn't really what I cared about, but I feel like it's worth delving into a little bit. Because I think there is something to it. So basically, Geralt is not really into this idea of there being a plan ahead of him, and there's a lot of people who are really into this idea of destiny. I don't think that this book really advocates for an idea of destiny. I think that the only way that I can really justify it, and I think that there is a very good case for it the more I think about it, is that destiny is how people in this world understand accepting their lives and accepting where their lives will go. A great example is how, like, Geralt doesn't want to accept the fact that a relationship might not work out. And I guess, like, the relationship not being something that will work out is what the people in the world of The Witcher would consider to be destiny. I think that destiny has these esoteric connotations to it, but I think that it's important to unpack that a little bit and think about destiny not esoterically and think of it more kind of pragmatically. From that perspective, I think you'll understand what the book is trying to feed you. I think that it was much more about the psychological, about Geralt's psychology and the Porcupine's Dilemma. So the Porcupine's Dilemma, if you're not familiar or haven't seen Neon Genesis Evangelion, is a idea that was created by Schopenhauer, I think. And the idea is that if you have two porcupines, even if they like each other very much, the closer they get to each other, the more they'll hurt each other. Okay. This is kind of a theme that is explored in the book. Geralt believes that the Porcupine's Dilemma is true. I don't think that Sapkowski, the writer, does. And you know, he has a very good relationship with Dandelion that is capable of depth and shared values, and they get along very well. And they are consistent companions. But he doesn't really succeed in his relationships with women. But it's not because he's a witcher, and it's not because he's a freak. And the whole Sword of Destiny, which is story arc, which is the final story arc in the novel, really shows how Geralt discovers that there is something separate from relationships with women, friendships, and just his whole Witcher identity that he can use to relate to people. And it is something that will really challenge his whole view of things and give him a very different and renewed sense of purpose. And I think that I'll probably make another video where I'll talk a bit about this more in detail in a kind of spoiler way, so I can actually tell you what I mean by that. But it's a very dynamic story, because it starts off and you have this guy who just is banging his head against the wall in his belief that he can't connect to anybody or have a meaningful relationship. And story arc. And something that I did mention in this video was that it seemed like there was a lot of editorial decisions involved with the production of these books. And I don't know if it was the author who made these editorial decisions. I don't know if it was a publisher or whoever, but they did a really good job. And I think that all these stories would have been fine by themselves and really enjoyable. But I think that the editor's really the star of the show here. Anyway, I loved the book. So when I made my last review, there were a couple people who said some very enthusiastic things and really recommended that I kept up with this. So I would like to thank those people. I have not started Blood of the Elves, which is the first in the novels yet, but I'll get around to it soon. I wanted to make this video before I cracked it open. I think that I also might like I read several books at once, and once again, everybody's free to add me on Goodreads. I read a lot of books at the same time, so it's possible that I might review something different that I might finish a little bit earlier, and gradually work my way through these Witcher books at my own kind of convenience. So please don't be offended if that happens. So I appreciate your patience, and I can't wait to share my next review with you.